Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Bob Salvatore.
Thanks. How you doing? You know, after 20 years, I thought I'd seen it all. Wrong. First of all, I got to thank Mythic for bringing me out here and really treating me well in this. Kind of a shock. Came out of the blue. And I think all of us owe a round of applause to our hosts, Mythic. My only request to them is that they give Julie a leave of absence, because I've got this massive book tour coming up, and I want her to plan it, or to help with the travel arrangements at least. All right, well, now that we've gotten rid of the obligatory sucking up, let's talk. I usually do this question and answer format, but I really can't see any of you. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got into fantasy and then games, because I love games. My name is Bob, and I'm a gamer geek, and I have been for 26 years now, and I'm proud of that, and I love that. Hi, Bob. Somebody got it. Good. When I was a kid, I loved to read. Really young kid, I mean, kindergarten, first grade. I loved to read. I had Charlie Brown books. I loved Peanuts. Snoopy was my hero, and I wrote my own Snoopy books. And then something happened. As I went through school, they beat the reading out of me. I'm in junior high, and they're giving me books like Silas Marner and Ethan Frome and Moby Dick, which I still think if you took 70 chapters out of Moby Dick, it's a hell of a short story. It got so bad, by the time I graduated from high school, I started college as a math major. I'm not kidding. I hated reading, and I hated writing. The only reading I did in high school was to get the grade. The only writing I did was to get the grade. And then something very strange happened to me my freshman year of college, 1977. God, that's a long time ago. For Christmas of that year, my sister gave me this box set of 4 books of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And it was a little white box set. And there was nothing like that. I had never seen anything like that. In 1977, there was no fantasy genre. This is hard for a lot of people to understand, especially kids today. I mean, because when I used to go to the bookstore, there was one bay for science fiction. And it was hard science fiction, Asimov, Bova, Clark, Heinlein. And down in the corner of that bay were The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. That was the fantasy section. 4 books. And then Terry Brooks came on the stage that year, actually. And the whole thing blew up. But there was no fantasy genre. So my sister hands me these books, and I said, well, what the heck are these? And she's trying to explain it. And I still remember the look on her face. And she's trying to tell me, it's about a hobbit. What's a hobbit? Well, it's like a dwarf, but they don't have beards, but they have hairy feet. Oh, they're dwarves. Yeah. And they're a bunch of dwarves, and they're going to find their homeland with this wizard. But there's a dragon there. I'm laughing at her by this point. So she just threw the books at me and said, just read them. And I'm thinking, great. And here I was expecting money or something for a Christmas gift, and she gives me this. So I put it aside, and I thought nothing more of it for a couple of months. And then in February of 1978, up in New England, we had the storm they still talk about, the Great Blizzard. And this one was for real. I went to bed on a Monday night, and they said we might get a little snow, so I'm thinking, cool, I won't have school tomorrow, right? And I had this very cool car, 69 Mercury Cougar, blue with a black vinyl roof, the hidden headlights, the whole night. It was my pride and joy. And I parked it right under my window. I woke up in the morning and saying, I hope we got some snow. I don't want to go to school today, like everyone else, including the teachers. And I went and looked out the window, and where my car was, all I saw was a little black spot. So I thought we got a little snow in the driveway, and that was the driveway, and somebody stole my car. So I was running downstairs screaming, somebody stole my car, somebody stole my car, and I realized that was the roof of my car. We didn't have school that day. We didn't have school that week. You couldn't get out of your house that week. We didn't have a road for 7 days, literally. So what did I do? Here I was, 19 years old, and stuck in my mother's house. Oh, joy of joys. I found these 4 books. I started reading them. And as I got into about the 20th page of The Hobbit, I said, oh my God, why didn't somebody give me this book to read when I was in junior high school instead of Ethan Frome or Moby Dick? And I read those books 3 times that week, all 4 of them, and I couldn't stop. And my mind was there. And I went on this adventure with Bilbo and then with Frodo, and it was amazing. It was simply amazing. I got back to school and I changed my major from math, computer science to communications, media, technical writing. Because in communications media, all of my electives became lit courses. Because all of a sudden I wanted to see what this was all about. I started remembering what it was like to read those Charlie Brown books when I was 6 years old and 8 years old. Fell in love with reading. Fell in love with writing. And when I got out of school, I had done quite well. I thought I was going to go get this job as a technical writer and set the world on fire. Yeah. Well, we had a little recession up in Massachusetts in 1981, and I wound up working in the same plastic factory that I had worked in to put myself through school. So my job for about 8 to 10 hours a day was standing on a metal bench next to this big metal table, taking lumps of scrap plastic and loading them into a grinder. Very cerebral job. Every 20 minutes, you had to remember to change the barrel under the grinder or you get flakes of plastic all over the floor. That was my life, and I was dying. And my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, and this is probably no small reason why, said to me, well, why don't you write that book you've been threatening to write? Because I had run out of fantasy books to read. You couldn't do that now. But back then, I had read Terry Brooks, I had read Stephen Donaldson, Anne McCaffrey, Fritz Leiber, Michael Moorcock. I was out. There were no other books to read. So I started writing a book. I spent about 6 months. I would come home from work. I was working at the factory during the day, but I was also working as a bouncer in local nightclubs at night. So I'd come home at 1 or 2 in the morning, depending which town I was working in. And instead of going to bed, I'd light some candles. I'd put on Fleetwood Mac's Tusk album. Yeah, I admit it. Stevie Nicks is in all my books. I admit it. Caddy Bree? Oh, you mean Stevie, huh? And we didn't have computers back then. How's that? I did get a PC Junior a few years in, but I was writing in a spiral notebook, longhand, by candlelight, to Tusk. And I spent about 6 months writing a book. And I'll never forget the day I finished. It was a March day in 1983. And we had one of those New England snowstorms where it was warm outside, but the snow was falling and the flakes were about this big, just drifting down. And the book actually ended with a snowstorm, so it was so appropriate. And I went downstairs, and my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, and this is probably why, had a bottle of champagne with one of those baby things on it that said it's a book. It was great. I mean, she'd come over every day, and she'd be downstairs talking to my father, who was going on and on about wait till next year with the Red Sox or something. And I'd be upstairs writing. What a relationship, huh? But it worked. And I wrote my book. And I didn't write a book to get published. I wrote a book, and that's weird. And a lot of people don't understand that. I did not intend on being a writer. I did not intend on making a living as a writer. I didn't have dreams that big. I didn't think you could. I wrote a book because I was looking at my life as being this kind of straight line. You work, you retire, you die. Okay? You work, you retire, you die. That's what I was looking at. That's what was all around me. And I didn't want that. I wanted something, anything, that I could give to my kids who could maybe one day hold up before my grandkids and say, want to see what your grandfather did? You want to see who your grandfather is? I wrote a book so I wouldn't be just another number in a world full of numbers. It had nothing to do with getting published. I didn't think that was ever a possibility. But I passed this book around to some friends, and they said, this is really good. You should try to publish this. So now I started thinking, well, what the heck? I really don't like working in the plastic factory. And I'm getting too slow at the job at the bouncer and getting beat up way too much. So I hired my sister to type it because I couldn't type. Because when I was in high school, You were either on a business track where they taught you how to type and become a secretary, or you were on a college track where they didn't teach you to type because there were no personal computers and everything you were going to do was in a little blue book. So I hired my sister, typed up this book, sent it out to several publishers, and got the worst rejection letters you can possibly imagine. I remember one of them said, "Dear Leonard." Okay. So they told me no. Well, I've always been the kind of guy, if you tell me no, I will die proving you wrong. I don't care. I will die proving you wrong. So, got married soon after. The kids started coming along. Had to go get a better job. Wound up working in finance out of the high-tech company. First, I was working in payroll at a saw and steel mill. Just kept working at that book, working at that book. My wife was working nights. I was working days, just trying to pay the bills. And when she would go to work at night, I'd get the kids to bed. And instead of watching TV, I would just sit there and write. Because now I wanted it. Now I was mad. Now I had something to prove. 4 years later, in 1987, January of 87, I had this book in hand. It was a book called Echoes of the Fourth Magic. And I thought, all right, now this is ready to get published. And I sent it back out. And one of the places I sent it was Wizards of the Coast. Well, then it was TSR, actually. TSR, the Dungeons and Dragons people. And the only way I got their name, I was a Dungeons and Dragons player by this point, but the way I got their name was in a book called The Writer's Market that listed all the publishers and said they were doing these books called Dragonlance books, and they were looking for new authors. So that was one of the places I sent the book. And I went to work, and I came home from work one day, and my wife said to me, "Someone named Mary Kirchhoff from TSR called." And I kind of stopped, and I said, "An editor called?" She said, "Yeah, she left a number. She wants you to call her back. They're an hour behind us because it's in Wisconsin." And I said, wait. Someone from TSR called. She says, "Yeah." I said, "Did they ask for Leonard?" No. So I called back, and I started talking with Mary, and she says to me, "I really like your book, but I can't publish it." Thanks. We only have room on our schedule for books in the Forgotten Realms. Do you think we can place this book in the Forgotten Realms? And I said, "What are the Forgotten Realms?" They weren't out yet. I didn't know anything about them. Well, we talked about it a little bit. There was no way we could place that book in the Forgotten Realms. Because Forgotten Realms there are two types of classic fantasy books. There are two types. There are books like Tolkien's, which take place in a world all their own. Middle-earth is not related to our planet. I mean, you can find all the analogies to the rise of the Third Reich and all of that. You can find all of that, and Tolkien says you're full of it, and he's probably right. But you can find the analogies to our world, but it's not related to our world. And then there are books where your hero goes into a fantasy world. And that's what my book was. It started in our world, went to a fantasy world. So it wouldn't work in Forgotten Realms. So she said, "Well, I like your writing, and I want you to audition for the book. We need to do the second book in the Forgotten Realms." Okay. So I went to work, and I put together an outline, and I won the audition. And this is how you know sometimes in your life that somebody's looking down on you and doing you favors without you knowing it. I had lost my dad a couple of years before, and I still think my dad did this for me, because had I sent in my manuscript to TSR 3 months earlier, they weren't looking for anyone else to write in the Forgotten Realms. They would have just sent me the standard rejection letter. Had I sent my manuscript into TSR 3 months later, well, TSR, most of the writers, Margaret Weiss, Tracy Hickman, Jeff Grubb, Troy Denning, Mary Kirchhoff, these people all worked at TSR. But the reason they needed someone else to write a Forgotten Realms book is these people were all working on Dragonlance. They didn't want to do Forgotten Realms. They wanted to do Dragonlance. Dragonlance were New York Times bestsellers. Nobody had any idea how the realms were going to do. Well, 3 months later, after my manuscript went in, the numbers for the first Forgotten Realms book, Doug Niles' excellent book, Dark Walk Around Moonshae. If you haven't read it, go read it. It's a fantastic book. The numbers were coming in, and they were huge. So now all of the TSR writers wanted to write Forgotten Realms books too. because there was money to be made. So 3 months earlier, no chance. 3 months later, I would have been competing against people who were a proven commodity to the company. People that the editors knew could deliver a book on time, and a good book. People like Troy Denning and Doug Niles and Jeff Grubb. I wouldn't have had a chance. 3 months earlier, 3 months later, I'd still be working in finance at a high-tech company somewhere. That's the reality. Well, I got lucky, and I haven't looked back. And it has been a wonderful, blessed experience. 20 years of fun. Drizzt turns 20 next summer. Think about that. And I know he's made it now because I've seen remarks on message boards from people saying, he's so emo. Dude, if Drizzt ever heard you say that, he'd carve up your sorry little ass in no uncertain terms. But what a trip. What a trip. Someone sent me some Order of the Stick cartoons. They've got this little dark elf wizard running around, and he's got twin scimitars. And someone says to him, hey, what's with the scimitars? It's standard issue. And his name is like Zdri or something. It's like Drizzt reversed. How cool is that? I just love it. But back to gaming and why we're here. I love gaming. When I first started out wanting to write, I found my creative outlet as a DM in Dungeons & Dragons. Now, has anyone here heard my favorite Dungeons & Dragons story? Has anyone here heard Wubba Wubba? Not you. You don't count. You're my son. He's heard it way too many times. Nobody here said, virgin meat. I love it. See, usually I go to Gen Con every year, and like, if there are 200 people in the room, 150 of them shout out, hey, tell us Wubba Wubba again. I've heard it too many times. But you haven't heard it, so good. My favorite Dungeons & Dragons story, why I love gaming. In my group, one of the guys is named Tommy. Tommy's a 6'4" prison guard who tries to be tough, and everybody knows he's a marshmallow. Always seems to be the guy on the short end of the lightning bolt, if you know what I mean. Well, Mike Ledger was running our game, and in a Mike Ledger campaign, you know that within the first 2 levels, somebody's getting a wand of wonder. You know it. And it will have unlimited charges, and he will have about 10 different tables that he refers to for what happens when you fire off this wand of wonder. And you know it's the wand of wonder because when you find it on the side, it says Wubba Wubba. I don't know why. It just says that. So I had a little halfling psionicist. We were playing in a Ravenloft campaign. Oh my God. Has anyone here played Ravenloft? I never want to meet the people that wrote that. These are some sick dudes. But it's so much fun to play there. So my psionicist won the role and got the Wubba Wubba wand. And sure enough, every time I used that darn thing, Tommy got blasted. It doesn't matter. We're running away from an unbeatable monster. I say Wubba Wubba. Tommy's feet get big, and he can't run. He starts tripping, gets caught, and gets killed. It doesn't matter. We're standing on the edge of a cliff, and the dragon's flying at us, and I say Wubba Wubba, and a gust of wind comes up behind Tommy. It didn't matter, no matter what I did. Lightning bolt, Tommy. Fireball, Tommy. It even got ridiculous in that if we were fighting something that used fire as a weapon, he'd put on all his fire protection gear, and I'd hit him with a cone of cold. It was just over and over and over. Every week, every time I'd say Wubba Wubba, Tommy would glare at me from across the table. You know, like, I know where you live. Because he knew before I even rolled the percentage dice that he's a dead man. So, we're in Ravenloft. Ugh. Something weird happens. Oh, gee. And this entire section of the world that we're in, like this football field section, gets torn out and put in this alternate plane of existence. And we're trapped in this like bubble of world with no monsters to kill, no treasure, no food, no nothing. So we can live our lives out as peaceful farmers in this football field, or we can figure out how to get back. Well, we did have a wizard who had a teleport spell, but unfortunately, there was one too many of us. No, it was fair. It was fair. We also had a bag of holding and a rod of resurrection. Well, you know, problem solved. Somebody's got to die. We drew straws. I lost. Well, not being one to just let Tommy come over and stomp me like he really wanted to, I took off all my gear, put it in a pile, patted it goodbye, used my psionics and floated up 500 feet and waited for my psionics to expire. I wanted to go out in a swan dive. I start falling, and Mike says, okay, you're dead. And Tommy goes, no. No. He's falling. And Tommy picks up my wand. And he says, you little bastard. And he points the wand at me, and he says, wubba wubba. And he's got this big grin, and he rolls the dice. Mike flips through his charts, closes his eyes, and says, caster and target change places. And that is why I play games. Just for that. The look on his face. 6'4" prison guard crying like a little baby.